Sloane looked Caroline up and down, then smiled lightly. She looks worn out, but good for her, I guess. Preston said nothing. He just laughed, a small, easy laugh that cost him nothing. Caroline stood on the other side of the thin wall, hearing every word. Her hand tightened, 7 months pregnant, alone inside her own hotel that he had absolutely no idea she owned. 2 days later, Preston walked into the boardroom with the smile of a man who always wins. Then he saw the name card, C. Whitfield Chair. He saw Caroline sitting at the head of the table. He saw the document inside his folder, majority shareholder Caroline Lynn Whitfield. Current holdings, 62%. His hands held the paper and went completely still. Marcus stepped in, nodding the same way he did every morning. Everything ready for you, boss. That moment Preston understood everything. And this is the story of the woman he thought he had left behind, but she had never gone anywhere at all. Follow now so you don't miss what happens next. The first thing she heard was heels on marble. Not her heels, someone else's. Caroline Whitfield was standing at the far end of the Hargrove Grand lobby, 7 months pregnant, wearing a navy blazer that still buttoned barely over the hard curve of her belly. She had a rolled set of blueprints tucked under one arm and a coffee cup in her other hand. The coffee had gone cold 20 minutes ago. She hadn't noticed. She was listening to a contractor named Ed Granger talk about load-bearing walls, and when Caroline Whitfield was listening, she was fully listening. That was how she worked. The automatic doors opened at 9:14 on a Tuesday morning. October light flooded in, thin and gold. She didn't look up right away. She heard the laugh first. High, practiced, the kind of laugh designed to carry across a room. The kind that announces its owner before the owner has fully arrived. Then a voice, low, easy, performing relaxed the way someone performs relaxed when they are actually very pleased with themselves. Caroline's hand tightened on the coffee cup. She did not turn around. Ed was still talking about the East Wing renovation. She let him talk for 3 more seconds. Then she said, very quietly, "Give me 1 second, Ed." Her voice came out level. She was proud of that. She turned. Preston Hargrove was standing in the center of the lobby of a hotel that he did not know she owned. He was wearing a charcoal suit she had never seen before. His hair was shorter than she remembered. He looked the same and completely different at the same time, and she felt it everywhere, that specific, unavoidable pain of seeing someone you loved and knowing, with the clarity you only get after the fact, exactly who they became when they stopped being careful around you. Sloane Merritt was on his arm. She was 29. Beautiful in the way Preston had always liked his things, beautiful, expensive, obvious, requiring maintenance. She had her hand looped through his elbow like she was posing for something. Maybe she was. Her eyes moved across the lobby in the quick, assessing way of someone who has learned to read rooms fast. Her gaze landed on Caroline. Something flickered across her face. Not recognition, evaluation. Women do this to each other sometimes, the quick inventory, the unconscious arithmetic. Sloane looked at Caroline, the blazer, the pregnancy, the blueprints, the cold coffee, and she did the math and arrived at an answer that made her visibly relax. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. She leaned into Preston and said something low, something quiet. Preston followed her gaze. He saw Caroline. A pause. Brief. Controlled. He recovered fast. He always recovered fast. And his face arranged itself into something Caroline used to call his charity grin. Warm on the surface. Empty underneath. The smile of a man performing warmth for an audience of one. Caroline, he said. Not a question, not quite a greeting. Something in between. Preston, she said. 3 seconds of silence stretched between them like something held at both ends. They existed in the same room for the first time in 8 months. The last time she had seen him, she had been sitting across a restaurant table. He was explaining, very calmly, that he needed to simplify his life, that their relationship had run its course, that he hoped she understood truly, that he thought she was wonderful, but he needed someone who wanted the same things he wanted. She had been 6 weeks pregnant at the time. She had not yet told him. She had sat across from him in that restaurant, watching his calm and certain face arrange itself around each careful sentence, and she had made a decision in real time. She had chosen, in that restaurant, on that night, not to tell him. Now she was standing in front of him with 7 months of that decision visible and obvious, and she watched him do the calculation. His eyes moved to her belly, then back to her face. She watched him work it out. She waited. "You look well," Preston said. That was all. Sloane smiled with her mouth only. "We're here for the weekend," Preston continued. He said it the way you say anything about a hotel you've simply chosen for its amenities. Comfortably. Without wait, like it was any lobby, like he had no idea at all. Thought we'd check in early if they can accommodate us. "Of course," Caroline said. "Marcus will take excellent care of you." Ed Granger appeared at her elbow with a question about fixtures. She turned back to her contractor. She did not watch them walk to the front desk. She felt her daughter kick once, hard, against the left side of her ribs. "I know," she said, very quietly. Not to Ed. Ed looked at her with mild confusion. Sorry, she said. Let's talk about the fixtures. Inside, though. Inside her mind, where nobody was watching and nothing required performance. He had brought her here. He had actually brought her here. Of every hotel in this city, the Four Seasons, the Meridian, the Pemberton on 5th, where her mother had spent 22 years changing sheets, he had walked into this lobby. He had crossed this marble floor. He was going to check in at that desk and ride that elevator and sleep in one of these rooms tonight. And he had absolutely no idea. Her mother's voice surfaced from some reliable interior place. The best thing about being underestimated, Caroline Lynn, is that people keep being surprised by you. She breathed. She picked up her cold coffee. She took a sip. It was terrible. She took another one. The chapter of her day that involved Ed Granger and load-bearing walls wrapped up efficiently. She took good notes. She asked 3 clarifying questions. She approved one decision and deferred another until she had reviewed the structural report. Then she walked to the elevator bank with her blueprints and her terrible coffee and pressed the button for the 4th floor. Marcus Webb materialized beside her just as the doors opened. That was one of Marcus's particular skills. He was always exactly where he needed to be, arriving at the precise moment without appearing to hurry toward it. The Hargrove party, he said. His voice was quiet and measured. Suite 12 of 4, long-term booking, 4 nights. He paused. Do you want me to? No, she said. Nothing special. Treat them like any other guest. A pause. You're sure? It was not quite a question. She looked at him. Marcus Webb had known her for 4 years. He had been the one to call her 3 years ago with the quiet information that the original owner of the Hargrove collection was looking to divest a majority stake. He had been the one to say, with the particular precision of someone who chooses words carefully, I think you're the right person. Not you could afford it. Not it might be a good investment. The right person. She had never forgotten that he said it that way. I'm sure, she said. For now. The elevator doors closed. She leaned against the back wall. She placed one hand flat on her belly. Well, she said softly to no one, to her daughter, to herself, this should be interesting. The elevator hummed upward. She stood in it and breathed and let the morning settle around her like something she was going to have to carry for a while. She was good at carrying things. She had been practicing for years. Mirror moment, she checked her phone in the elevator. 3 times, locked it, locked it again. Then put it face down in her bag. Some habits don't know yet that you have gotten stronger. Her hands knew before her head did. There was nothing on that phone she needed to see right now. There was nothing on that phone worth the cost of looking. She put it away. She went to work. The spa on the 2nd floor had a reading lounge that most guests never found. It was tucked at the end of a short corridor past the reception desk, past a door that looked like it led to a utility closet but actually led to a small, quiet room with 2 armchairs, a window that faced the garden, and a small table with a carafe of water that nobody ever remembered to refill. Caroline refilled it herself when she found it empty. She liked that. She liked the specific small satisfaction of restoring something simple. She had discovered the lounge in her first week as majority owner of the Hargrove Grand. She came here sometimes when she needed to think and didn't want to do it at her desk, where everything had a decision attached to it. She was sitting in one of those chairs at 11:30 on a Tuesday morning when she heard them. She didn't realize it at first. The wall in the reading lounge was thin. She had been meaning to have it reinforced as part of the ongoing renovation, and sound carried from the corridor outside the spa reception in a way that was both inconvenient and on this particular Tuesday deeply unfortunate. She heard Sloane's voice first. Did you see her? Then Preston's voice, low and warning, leave it alone. I'm just saying. Sloane. She looked. Sloane paused, recalibrating, softening the delivery without softening the content. I'm not being mean. I'm genuinely just saying. She looked rough. She's really let herself go. Silence on Preston's end. He didn't defend her. Of course he didn't. That was not a surprise. That was not new information. Caroline told herself this clearly. It did not change the fact that something in her chest went quiet and tight in the way of a door closing. Sloane again, warmer now, leaning into him. She must have found someone pretty quickly after you, though, to already be that far along. A long silence. Yeah, Preston said, just that single word. Just yeah, the way you agree to something small. The way you agree when someone passes you the salt. Good for her, I guess, Sloane said, light, dismissive. The tone of someone filing a person away for good. She seemed like the type who'd end up one of those well-meaning, kind of invisible. Preston laughed. It was not a cruel laugh. That was somehow worse. It was just an agreeing laugh. Small and easy and requiring nothing from him. He laughed the way you laugh when someone has said something you find mildly accurate and it costs you nothing to agree. Caroline sat very still in her chair. Her hands were flat on her thighs. She pressed them down. The way she did when she needed her body to know something before her mind had finished deciding it. Kind of invisible. The footsteps faded. The corridor went quiet. She sat there. The carafe of water needed refilling. She stared at the garden through the window and thought about the first time Preston told her he loved her. They were in his car, in a parking garage, going nowhere in particular. He said it sideways, almost by accident, like the words had gotten out before he approved them. Then he looked alarmed at himself. And she had laughed because the alarm was so genuine and so un-Preston that it was the most honest thing she'd seen him do. And the alarm dissolved and he laughed too, and it was real. She was certain it had been real. In that moment, in the dark of the parking garage, it was real. But real can coexist with small. Real can coexist with a man who will laugh. 8 months later, at the word invisible, she did not cry. She wanted to be precise with herself about that. She did not cry. She took out her phone and called Nora. "He's here," she said when Nora picked up on the second ring. A beat. "What do you mean here?" Nora said. "At the hotel. He checked in this morning. With her." Nora's response took approximately 4 seconds and involved language that would have made Caroline's mother press her lips together in that specific way she had. "Nora, I'm going to need a moment. I need you to say something useful," Caroline said. Okay, give me a second." The sound of something being set down. Nora collecting herself. That pivot from real reaction to useful response, it was one of the things Caroline had always loved most about her. The honesty first, then the help. "Do they know?" Nora asked. "No." "Does Marcus know?" "Yes, he's handling it." "So they are literally guests at your hotel?" "Yes." "He brought his new girlfriend to your hotel. He doesn't know it's my hotel." A pause. "Oh," Nora said. And then slowly, like arriving at something, "Oh, this is actually incredible." Nora. I know. Are you okay? Tell me you're okay." Caroline opened her mouth to say yes. That was what she always said. That was the reliable, practiced answer. What came out instead was she said, "I look kind of invisible." Silence on Nora's end. "Sloane said that? She didn't mean for me to hear it. I don't care if she—" Nora stopped. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped to something fierce and quiet. "Listen to me. You own the building they are sleeping in tonight. You invisible? You're the whole horizon." Caroline exhaled, slow and deliberate. "Come for dinner tonight," she said. "I'll have Marcus set something up in my private dining room." "The one off the kitchen?" "Yes, the one that overlooks the garden." "Done. I'll bring wine." A pause. "Can you have wine?" "No, I'll bring wine for me and something fizzy and nice for you." "Thank you, Nora. Don't thank me. Thank Preston for accidentally engineering the most satisfying dinner setup I have ever personally attended." Caroline almost smiled. Almost. She went to refill the carafe. Validation whisper, standing at the small sink in the reading lounge, water running cold and then warm over her hands. Caroline thought it clearly, and without drama. "I am not invisible. I have never been invisible. I stopped performing visibility for people who weren't paying attention. Those are completely different things." The rest of the afternoon she spent in meetings. 3 contractor updates. 1 conversation with her attorney Judith about the East Wing permits, which were progressing smoothly. A call with Uncle Gene about the quarterly board summary, which was exactly where it should be. She was efficient. She took careful notes. She made 3 decisions and deferred 2 others. Nobody in any of those conversations would have guessed what was happening 3 floors above her. That, she knew, was one of her genuine skills. Compartmentalization. Preston had called it coldness when they were together. Her therapist called it a survival strategy she had developed early and could now finally choose to use or set down at will. She chose to use it today. She did not let herself go upstairs. She did not let herself think about what they were doing or what he might have said about her over the past 8 months, to this woman with the borrowed confidence and the smile that stopped at her eyes. She worked. At 3 in the afternoon, while she was reviewing permit applications at her desk, her daughter kicked, hard, twice in quick succession. "Hi, sweetheart," Caroline said softly, her hand going automatically to the spot. Kept working. Evening came to the Hargrove Grand in amber and warmth. Caroline had watched 100 evenings arrive in this lobby from the mezzanine. She loved this particular light, the way it fell across the marble floors, the way the flower arrangement seemed to glow from inside. Her mother used to say that a hotel at evening light was one of the most honest things in the world. No pretension left by that hour, just warmth and welcome and the particular comfort of a place that says, "You are safe here for tonight." Her mother had learned about hotels from the inside out. Dorothy Whitfield spent 22 years as a housekeeper at the Pemberton on 5th. She knew which rooms the lonely businessmen requested year after year. She knew which couples argued in low voices and which ones laughed at breakfast. She knew which guests left tips and which ones left messes. She brought that knowledge home to Caroline across 22 years of dinner table stories told in the easy matter-of-fact way of someone reporting on the lives of people who never thought they were being seen. Caroline became a hotel consultant at 24. She became an owner at 28. Her mother did not yet know the full scope of that ownership. Caroline had been working up to that conversation for 3 years. It was the conversation where she would have to explain how much she had done quietly, and the why was still something she was untangling. She sat in the mezzanine now with a sparkling water and watched the evening lobby. Preston and Sloane came down at 7, dressed for dinner. He was in his blue suit, the one she had always liked, and she hated herself a little for noticing. Sloane was in something red that fit the way expensive things fit. They looked good together. She was not going to pretend otherwise. They looked like the cover of something aspirational. They walked through the lobby and out through the main doors into the October night. Caroline watched them go, and then she did the thing she had been carefully not doing all day. She remembered. The memories came the way they always came when you had been holding them back, in no particular order, overlapping, carrying smells and sounds she hadn't asked for. Preston at 36, standing in her apartment doorway with grocery bags, and that specific embarrassed look he got when he was being spontaneously kind. I thought I'd make dinner, if that's all right. It was always all right. It was more than all right. The weekend in Connecticut. Early in their relationship, when everything still had the quality of something recently unwrapped, they drove up with no particular plan and ended up at a bed and breakfast that smelled like pine and old wood. They lay in bed until 11 in the morning doing nothing except talking. She told him about her mother's hotel stories. He told her about being the only Hargrove child who hadn't entered the family business willingly. He told her, and she had believed him with her whole heart, that what he wanted most in his life was something that felt real. She had thought she understood what he meant. She had thought, with the full sweetness of someone who still believed in the thing they were holding, I can be part of that. The arguments came back too, the ones that should have told her earlier. The way he would go quiet when she talked about the hotel acquisition. The way conversations about her work would get rerouted, almost imperceptibly, back toward his. The way she had found herself, without quite deciding to, minimizing her accomplishments in his company. Making herself smaller. Making the space between them more comfortable for him to occupy. Kind of invisible. She had made herself kind of invisible. For him. She had stood in her own light and she had dimmed it. And he had laughed. Her eyes were dry. She noticed this. She noted it the way you note something about yourself that surprises you. She was not devastated. She was grieving. Those were different things. Grief was clean. Grief was appropriate. Grief was what you did when something that had been real had ended, and you were finally willing to look at it directly, without managing the angle. She placed her hand on her belly. Your father, she said quietly to her daughter, with as much honesty as she could assemble, is a man who could have been better. I think sometimes he knew that. I think that was his sadness, underneath everything else. But it is not our sadness, you understand? The baby shifted under her hand, a slow rolling movement, a response. Caroline took a long breath. We are going to be extraordinary, she said, both of us. Mirror moment, she sat in the mezzanine chair for a long time before she realized she couldn't go in. Couldn't walk through the lobby. Couldn't go to her own dining room. Not yet. She needed 5 more minutes. She bargained with herself for exactly 5, watching the second hand of the lobby clock from above. When 5 minutes were up, she stood. She went in. Nora arrived at 7:30 with a bottle of Burgundy and a bag of takeout from the Thai place 2 blocks east. I decided hotel food felt wrong tonight, Nora said, dropping into the chair across from Caroline in the private dining room. Even if it's your hotel food, I love the kitchen here. I know you do. Tonight I needed dumplings out of a cardboard container. That's a trauma response, and I'm not apologizing for it. Caroline laughed, a real one, the first of the day. They ate in the private room with the garden view, and Nora talked between bites first about nothing, letting Caroline settle, then about Preston, about all the things she had been diplomatically holding back for 18 months. I never liked him, Nora said. I know that's what everyone says after the fact. I know it sounds convenient. I'm saying it anyway without apology, because it happens to be specifically and personally true. He had a thing, you know what thing I mean? Where he'd listen to you talk and you'd realize 20 minutes later that he was just waiting for his turn. He wasn't always like that, Caroline said. No, he wasn't. The early version was better. Nora topped up her wine. But the early version didn't last. No, and you knew. Caroline was quiet. I knew, she said. I just kept deciding to know it tomorrow. Validation whisper. In the silence that followed, Caroline sat with that admission fully, not with shame. With the clean, factual quality of someone reading a document she had been avoiding. I knew. I kept choosing tomorrow. Tomorrow is today. And today I am fine. Nora asked carefully about Preston seeing her in the lobby. He knows, Caroline said. About the baby. He did the math. Did he say anything? He said I looked well. Nora stared at her across the table for a moment. He said, you look well, that's what he said? He said it like I was a colleague he used to work with at a company he had since left. A long pause. I want to be the one to tell him, Nora said. About the hotel. I want to watch his face when he... Nora, I know, she exhaled. When does he find out? I don't know yet, Caroline said. But not tonight. Tonight I just need to get through to tomorrow. Outside the garden window, the October night settled around the hotel. Somewhere above them, 12 floors up, in Suite 1204, two people would be coming back from dinner soon. Caroline ate her dumplings. She would deal with tomorrow when it arrived. She was good at arriving where she needed to be. Wednesday morning, Caroline was at her desk by 7:15. She had a system for mornings. She had always had it, this ordered sequence that kept her anchored and functional. Emails first, then the overnight manager's report, then a brief walk through the lobby before the day fully woke up. She greeted the night staff coming off shift. She checked the flower arrangements. She made sure the carafe in the reading lounge was full. This Wednesday she did all of it. She was on her second circuit of the lobby when her phone rang. It was Judith. You're calling early, Caroline said. I had a conversation last night. Judith's voice had that particular quality it got when she was delivering information she knew you needed to sit down for. You should find somewhere to sit. Caroline found a chair in the corner of the lobby near the ficus tree. She sat. Tell me, she said. Judith had had dinner with a colleague from a competing firm. Routine, unremarkable. What was not routine was the topic that had come up over dessert. The colleague represented a development group that had been quietly circling properties in the Hargrove collection portfolio. In the course of their conversation, the colleague mentioned that his client had been given certain information about the collection's ownership structure, information suggesting the majority stake was held by a woman who was, quote, a consultant with no real development background, a woman who had gotten lucky with an early acquisition, a woman whose primary qualification was a personal relationship with someone in the industry, someone being Preston Hargrove. Caroline held the phone against her ear. She was quiet for a long moment. He told them I was riding his coattails, she said. In so many words, he told people in the industry that I got where I am because of who I knew. She stopped. She made herself finish it. Because of him. It appears so. The lobby was filling around her, the morning crew arriving, guests heading to breakfast, the easy, ordered morning of a well-run hotel. A hotel that ran the way it ran because Caroline Whitfield had spent 4 years learning every system in it, rebuilding what didn't work, protecting what did, sitting in contractor meetings and permit reviews and quarterly board sessions, and making 400 small decisions that added up invisibly to a place that worked. How long has he been saying this, she asked. Judith paused. My best guess is since the breakup. 8 months. 8 months. She pressed the phone to her ear and looked at the lobby floor and breathed very deliberately in and out. Her internal voice was not polite. It was not measured or professional or kind. He had been telling people she had made it because of him. He had been in rooms that mattered, rooms where decisions were made and reputations were built, and he had been quietly, efficiently rewriting her, making her a footnote to his story, an anecdote, a lucky consultant who had benefited from proximity to a Hargrove. She didn't say any of this to Judith. Is there legal exposure? She asked instead. Reputational, not legal. He stayed just on the safe side. It's framing, not slander. Okay. Caroline, I need to think, Judith. Can I call you at 9? She put the phone away. She sat with the ficus tree for 4 minutes by the lobby clock. He thought I was an afterthought. He thought I was something that existed in reference to him. He is sleeping 12 floors above me in a hotel that I own. He has no idea. Mirror moment. She did what she always did when absorbing something difficult. She moved. She stood up and began her morning walk through lobby, to dining room, to kitchen corridor, to garden on autopilot, greeting people by name, checking things, being present in the specific way that required nothing and gave everything. Her hands and feet handled the morning while her mind ran underneath, doing the real work of deciding what happened next. Uncle Gene called at 8. Gene Whitfield was 66. Caroline's father's older brother. He was on her board because when she had come to him at 28 with her acquisition plan, he had not told her she was too young. He had not told her she was inexperienced. He had looked at her plan for a long time and asked, have you accounted for operating costs in the second quarter? When she pointed to the page where she had, he looked at it and said, then let's talk about how I can help. I heard from Marcus, he said when she answered. Of course you did. Are you all right? I'm angry, she said. She could say this to Gene in a way she couldn't say it to most people. Gene did not manage her emotions. He received them. Good, he said. You should be. He's been telling people that my position. She stopped. She couldn't say it out loud to Gene. It sat in her throat like something swallowed wrong. That you owe your position to him, Gene said. You knew? I heard a whisper of it 2 months ago. I should have told you. Gene, I know. I should have told you. I'm sorry. She breathed through it. What do I do? Gene was quiet for a moment. She could hear him thinking that low, steady exhale he made when he was really turning something over. Her father used to make the same sound. She had not let herself think about that in years. Today she let herself. You don't do anything yet, he said. Preston Hargrove is in your hotel. He'll be there 4 days. Let the story reveal itself. He paused. The board meeting is Friday. Yes, he'll be there Friday. Caroline went still. What do you mean he'll be there Friday? One of our other board members, Barrett Holloway, has apparently invited him as a potential investor. I found out this morning. Barrett doesn't know your history. He's just doing what he thinks is good business. Silence. So Preston is going to walk into a board meeting, Caroline said slowly, at a hotel he doesn't know I own. It appears so. She thought about the lobby yesterday morning, the charity grin. You look well. She thought about watching them walk out through the front doors at 7 in the evening. She thought about Judith's phone call. She thought about the word invisible. Don't tell Barrett, she said. Caroline, please, Jean, let it unfold. Let him come to the meeting. Let him figure it out in the room. A longer pause. You're sure? I'm sure. She was not entirely sure, but she was certain. And those she had learned were different things. Validation whisper, she said it out loud at 8:45 in her empty office. He didn't make me. He didn't even see me. And I let him not see me for a while, and that is something I understand now. But I see myself. I have always, underneath it all, seen myself. Wednesday passed in a careful holding pattern. She saw Preston once, at lunch, crossing from the kitchen corridor toward the east wing. He was in the main dining room with Sloane. He saw her. She watched him see her. His expression did something complicated, guilt and recalculation arriving at the same moment, each jostling for position. He started to lift a hand, maybe a wave, maybe something else. She kept walking. She had a meeting about permits. She went to it. Wednesday night arrived like a weight settling across the building. Caroline sat in her bathroom at 11:45. She did this sometimes not to relax, though her body was grateful for the warmth these days, but to think without interruption. The bathroom in her apartment on the 3rd floor was small and white and honest. No pretension. She had kept it plain deliberately. It was the only room she had never renovated. There was something she needed about that. Something about having one room exactly as it was when she got here. She was not fully in the bath tonight. She was sitting on the edge of it, in her robe, feet not quite touching the floor, one hand resting on the hard curve of her belly. The hotel at midnight was never silent. There were systems running, heating, ventilation, service elevators, the distant hum of the kitchen preparing for morning. But it was quiet in the particular way of a place at rest. She had learned over 4 years to love that sound, the sound of a building breathing. Tonight she was having trouble loving it. She thought about her daughter. She thought about what she was giving her and what she could not. Here was what Caroline Whitfield knew, with her full, clear mind. She was successful. She was prepared. She had resources and plans and a legal team and an uncle who loved her and a best friend who brought dumplings and a mother who had taught her everything worth knowing about how the world actually worked when you got close enough to see it clearly. She was going to be fine. Here was what she knew in the dark, in the part of herself that did not respond to reason. Her daughter would not have a father who chose her. Preston Hargrove had made his calculation 8 months ago in a restaurant over a 40-minute dinner. He had chosen the version of his future that did not include Caroline. He had made that choice before he knew about the baby. She told herself this mattered. Sometimes it did. But there were hours, and this was one of them, when she sat with the fact that her daughter would grow up knowing she had not been chosen, that her father had looked at the shape of his future and decided to simplify it, and that there was nothing Caroline could do about that. No amount of ownership or success or quiet dignity changed it. It was simply true. She put her forehead down on her hands. She breathed. She let herself feel all of it, all the way through, without managing it. She cried. Not the pretty kind, not the cinematic kind that looks like something, the unglamorous, necessary, real kind. Alone in her white bathroom at midnight, 7 months pregnant, the hotel humming around her, she cried for the future her daughter deserved, and the father she might not have, and the woman Caroline had been making herself into in order to bridge the gap between the two. She cried for the woman she had been in Connecticut, lying in that bed until 11 in the morning. Believing in something with both hands, she cried until she didn't anymore. It took about 12 minutes. Then she blew her nose, which was undignified, and she sat back up straight, and she looked at her own reflection in the mirror across from her. Puffy eyes, robe that had seen better days, 7 months of an entire person living inside her. She thought, I have cried the right amount for this situation. I don't need to cry it again. She wouldn't either. That was a skill she had earned, not inherited. Mirror moment, the 3 in the morning searches. She did them anyway, knowing she shouldn't. She searched his name, then his company. Then, after a pause that lasted long enough to almost stop herself, she searched her own name. What came back was a clean, solid professional record. Her own work, her own history documented and real. She closed the search. She felt better for having seen it. She put the phone down and did not pick it up again. She called her mother at 1 in the morning. Dorothy Whitfield picked up on the second ring. because Dorothy Whitfield did not sleep deeply and never had. Not in all the years Caroline had been calling her. Not once. I was wondering when you'd call, her mother said. How did you? Nora texted me. Of course she did. Mom. He's in the hotel. I know, sweetheart. He doesn't know it's mine. I know that too. A comfortable silence. The kind only available between two people who have known each other long enough not to fill every pause with sound. Tell me something useful, Caroline said. Dorothy considered this the way she considered everything briefly, decisively, without performance. You know what I learned from 22 years of making beds that other people slept in? She said. Most people are exactly as small as they appear. They only seem larger because you're too close. When you get the distance right, you can see them clearly for what they are. Caroline was quiet. Preston Hargrove, her mother continued, calm as weather, is a man who needed you to be smaller so he could feel larger. That is not your wound to carry. That is his. I know, Mom. I know you know. I'm saying it out loud so it goes somewhere other than that busy head of yours. A pause. How's my granddaughter? Caroline looked down. Active, she said. She's been kicking all afternoon. Smart girl. Getting ready. Yeah, you sleep, her mother said. Tomorrow will be what it is. Friday is the board meeting. I know. He's going to walk into that meeting and see, Dorothy said. Yes. That is exactly what is going to happen. He is going to see, and that will be enough. Thursday morning. Caroline woke at 6 with unusual clarity. She had slept in short pieces 3 hours, then 2, then 45 minutes that felt like 10, but she woke feeling, strangely, assembled, like the parts of herself that had scattered in that bathroom at midnight had found their way back and settled quietly into place. She made coffee in the apartment kitchen. She stood at the window and watched the October street below wake up. Then she made 3 phone calls. The first call was to Judith. I need the ownership documentation current and clean, Caroline said. The full transparency chain from original acquisition to present. I want it in a binder I can hold. I can have that to you by end of day today. Thank you. The second call was to Marcus. Board meeting Friday at 10, she said. Standard setup in the main conference room, but I want fresh flowers. The ranunculus arrangement, not the corporate fern. And I want name cards at every seat from the start, including yours at the head of the table, including mine. A brief pause on Marcus's end. Not surprise, something more like satisfaction, quiet and contained. Done, he said. The third call was to Jean. Don't warn Barrett, she said, and don't warn Preston, but be there early. I'll be there at 9. Thank you, Jean, Caroline. A pause. Your father would be beside himself right now. I mean that in every good way possible. She had to close her eyes for a moment. I know, she said. Thank you. She spent Thursday in a state she recognized from the best days of her working life. Fully present, slightly electric. Moving through the hotel with the quiet authority she had spent years developing without naming it. She had been performing smallness, she realized subtly, below the level of decision. Keeping her voice a half measure down. Taking the service corridor instead of the main hall when she thought Preston might be nearby. Not hiding exactly. But not fully present either. Today she was fully present. She walked the main hall. She stood in the lobby. She talked to her staff by name as she always did, and she noticed that several of them looked at her slightly differently. Not because she had changed, because she had stopped dimming. Nora called at noon. How are you? I'm good, Caroline said. It was mostly true, which was better than entirely performed. What happens tomorrow? He walks into a room and realizes. And then? And then we go from there, Nora exhaled. Can I come? Tomorrow morning? You don't have to. I know I don't have to. Can I come? Yes, Caroline said. Come. Mirror moment. She walked past the main dining room at noon and saw Preston having lunch alone. Sloane must have been at the spa, and he was looking at his phone with the focused absorption of someone not quite present in the room. She thought clearly and without drama, he has no idea that this is my dining room. He has no idea that the fork he is using was chosen by me. The art on that wall was approved by me. The light in this room is this particular warm gold because I argued with a lighting contractor for 2 hours about it. He has no idea. That is the last time that will be true. Thursday afternoon moved with the particular efficiency of a day that has a clear destination. She met with Ed Granger and signed off on 3 major decisions for the East Wing renovation. She reviewed the quarterly numbers with Jean, who had come in early to prepare. They went through the ownership documentation together when Judith delivered it at 4, a clean, thorough, airtight binder that laid out 3 years of careful acquisition and stewardship. Reading it, Caroline felt not for the first time but more sharply than usual the full weight of what she had built. Quietly, without announcing it, without requiring anyone to witness it. She had thought she was protecting it by being quiet. Now she understood she had also been protecting herself. Ready? Jean asked when they finished. Almost, she said. She went to her apartment and changed into the suit she had bought 6 months ago for exactly this occasion. Forest green, excellent cut. Bought when she was barely showing and it somehow still fit. She sat on the edge of her bed for 5 minutes with her hands folded in her lap. She thought about her mother, who learned the bones of this building from the inside out, one room at a time. She thought about her father, who believed in her before she believed in herself. She thought about her daughter, who was running out of room. She stood up. She went back to work. At 8 Thursday evening, she encountered Preston and Sloane in the lobby. No ducking, no corridors. A real encounter. They were coming in from dinner, third night running. They had been out each evening, and she was crossing the lobby toward the front desk with a question about the following day's room assignments. Their paths intersected near the floral arrangement by the east entrance. Sloane's expression did something interesting when she saw Caroline. A micro-reassessment, a recalibration. Caroline today was not the tired woman from Tuesday morning. She was upright, present, forest green, slightly electric, and carrying herself differently in a way that Sloane clocked even if she couldn't have named it. Preston looked at her. "Caroline," he said. "Preston." "Sloane." She nodded to both of them, professionally, warmly, the way she would greet any guest who was having a pleasant stay. "I hope you've had a good evening." "Excellent dinner," Preston said. The charity grinned, but something had moved behind his eyes. She had seen this before. This was Preston when the information he had about a situation and the actual situation were beginning to misalign. When the calculation he'd made wasn't adding up the way it should. "Good," she said. "Enjoy the rest of your evening." She continued to the front desk. She made her inquiry. She thanked the clerk. She walked to the elevator. She did not smile until the doors closed. Validation whisper. In the elevator going up, she gave herself this like a gift. As a plain statement of fact, "I have been grace under pressure this entire week, and nobody made me do it. I chose it. Every single time I chose it. That is the difference." Friday, 6 in the morning, October light arriving pale and clean through the east-facing windows of her apartment. She had slept 6 straight hours, the best she had slept all week. She woke before her alarm in the slow, complete way of someone whose body has finally decided to cooperate. She lay still for a moment, hand on her belly, feeling her daughter move in the easy rolling way of early morning. Not kicking, just present, just there. "Today," she said quietly. She got up. She dressed with care, the green suit. Low-heeled shoes, she had made her peace with that weeks ago and did not revisit it. A single necklace, her grandmother's. A small gold initial, the letter C, which she had worn since she was 17 and which she had never once in all those years taken off. She looked at herself in the mirror. Yes, she thought. That's her. Nora arrived at 8:30 with a bag of pastries and the expression of someone who had been ready for this day for approximately 18 months. "I brought croissants from the French place on the corner," she said, "because I believe in supporting your victory with butter and carbohydrates." Caroline hugged her. They ate in the apartment kitchen, standing, neither of them wanting to sit. Too alert for sitting, Nora asked about the baby. Caroline said she had been active since 5 in the morning. Nora said that was a good sign. That was a girl who knew something was happening. Jean arrived at the hotel at 9 and came directly up to the apartment. He looked at Caroline for a long moment without speaking. "Your father's eyes," he said, and he hugged her. She held on a moment longer than she had intended to. Board members began arriving at 9:15. Barrett Holloway came first, middle-aged, genuinely warm, entirely without idea of what the morning held. He confirmed cheerfully that his potential investor was on the way and that he thought this could be a real partnership for the group. Caroline received this with a pleasant and professional smile. Thomas Aldridge arrived at 9:30, Caldwell at 9:40. Both measured, both ready, both prepared. Marcus sent her a text at 9:52. "He's in the lobby. Coming up." She read it once. She put her phone in her jacket pocket. She walked to the conference room. She took her seat at the head of the table, the chairs filled. Jean beside her, deliberate and steady. Barrett near the door, watching the hallway. Thomas Aldridge and Caldwell settling in, opening their folders, the ordinary preparatory sounds of a board meeting about to begin. Then, Preston Hargrove in the doorway. 9:58 on a Friday morning. Navy suit. The easy posture of a man who has walked into many rooms and understood himself to be someone who mattered in them. He was noticed, but not the way he expected. He saw Caroline. She watched it happen in real time. The recognition, the confusion, the beginning of recalibration. His eyes moved from her face, to the chair she was sitting in, to the name card in front of her, to the windows behind her showing the city in pale October light. The name card said C. Whitfield Chair. Behind her the hotel hummed. The lobby worked. The dining room served breakfast. The kitchen produced its 100 small marvels. The East Wing renovation was exactly on schedule. Her hotel, her table, her name. Preston stopped in the doorway. Their eyes met. She said nothing. She did not need to. Barrett Holloway, bless him, stepped in with his cheerful, well-meaning obliviousness. "Preston, glad you could join us. You know some of the group: Jean Whitfield, Thomas Aldridge, Caldwell, and of course, the chair of the Hargrove collection." He gestured toward Caroline. "Caroline Whitfield." We've met, Preston said. His voice came out steady. She gave him that. Wonderful, Barrett said, as though this were merely a pleasant coincidence, and gestured to the empty chair across from Caroline. Sit, sit, we're just getting started. Preston sat. He opened the folder in front of him. Inside the folder, as in all board meeting packets, was the ownership summary of the Hargrove Collection Hotel Group. Clean, thorough, prepared by Judith. Exact. At the top of the page, in the clear and factual language of corporate documentation, majority shareholder Caroline Lynn Whitfield. Initial majority stake acquired 3 years prior. Current holdings 62%. He read it. She watched him read it. He looked up. Mirror moment. She thought the most specific, most private thought of the entire week. She thought about her mother at 28, changing sheets in a hotel she didn't own, carrying other people's lives home in her stories, teaching her daughter, without meaning to teach her anything, everything about how a place should feel. Caroline thought, I did this for you, Mom. I did it for the little girl who watched you come home with tired feet and a full heart. I did it for her too. She did not cry. She was perfectly calm. Shall we begin? Caroline said. Her voice was even, clear. She took one breath. She began the meeting. The board meeting ran 90 minutes. Caroline ran it, the way she ran all of them, precisely, warmly, without ceremony. She moved through the quarterly reports with efficiency. She covered the East Wing update, the numbers for the coming quarter, 2 operational decisions that had been pending. She asked good questions. She answered better ones. She thanked the board members for their preparation and meant it. Through all of it, Preston Hargrove sat across the table. He did not speak often. When he did, he was measured and careful and professional. He asked 2 questions, both relevant, both the questions of someone who actually understood what they were looking at. She answered them the same way she answered everyone else's questions. Like he was any other person in the room. Like this was not the most controlled 90 minutes of her professional life. When the formal portion ended and people began gathering their folders and pushing back their chairs, Barrett stepped outside to take a call. Thomas Aldridge and Caldwell drifted toward the coffee service at the side table. Gene, who had positioned himself with great deliberateness throughout the meeting, moved with them, which left Caroline and Preston. She did not move. She sat at the head of the table. He came to her. He sat in the chair beside her, not across from her, beside her, and for a moment there were just 2 people at a conference table in October, which was not what they were at all. How long? He asked. 3 years, she said. Since before we met. Pause. I didn't know, he said. No. You didn't tell me. She looked at him. Would it have changed anything? A long silence. He was honest in this moment. She gave him that too. He didn't perform an answer. He didn't reach for something reassuring. He sat with the question and actually considered it. And what crossed his face was something complicated and private, and maybe the very beginning of understanding something he should have understood a long time ago. I don't know, he said. Neither do I, she said. That was always the problem. She let that sit in the air between them. Then, because she had thought about this moment and decided what she wanted it to be, she was not angry. She was not triumphant. She was not cold. She was clear. Preston, she said, I need you to stop telling people in the industry that I succeeded because of you. His jaw tightened. I did. You did. Quiet, final. Not a debate, not an accusation. A fact. I have documentation. Judith has more. I'm not interested in a legal route, but I'm also not willing to let it continue. She paused. You don't have to admire what I built, but you need to stop misrepresenting it. He looked at the table for a long moment. All right, he said. Thank you. She began to gather her papers. He stayed in his chair. The baby, he said. She paused. A girl, she said. She's due in January. Is she? He stopped, started again. Do you want me to be? I don't know yet, Caroline said, honestly, without softening it and without sharpening it. I think that's something we figure out carefully and slowly, with attorneys and a great deal of good faith. From both of us. She did not say, you laughed when Sloan called me invisible. She did not say, you have been in rooms telling people I am a footnote to your story. She did not say, you sat across from me in a restaurant and ended things with the calm of a man canceling a subscription, and you walked away and never once asked if I was okay. She did not say any of it, not because she had forgiven it. Because she had decided clearly, ahead of time, in the quiet of her own choosing, that she would not spend the most important chapter of her life in the previous one. I hope, she said, that you'll choose to show up. For her, whatever that looks like. She stood. He looked up at her. Caroline, he said. I thought you were... I know what you thought, she said. You were wrong. She picked up her folder. She walked toward the door. She did not slam it. She did not deliver a final speech. She walked out of the room with her folder and her grandmother's necklace, and her daughter kicking steadily against her ribs. And as she moved down the corridor, Marcus fell into step beside her with the quiet, competent ease she had come to rely on absolutely. How'd it go, he said. She considered. It went, she said. He nodded. Boss, he said, which was what he had always called her for 4 years, and which today she heard completely differently. Heard as though for the first time, a bell struck cleanly in a quiet room. The contractors are ready for the East Wing walkthrough whenever you are. Give me 10 minutes, she said. She went to the reading lounge. She sat in her chair by the window. She looked at the garden. She breathed. Validation whisper. She sat there for 10 minutes and she did not look at her phone. She did not replay the meeting. She did not rehearse what she could have said differently. She just sat in the chair and looked at the garden and let the morning be exactly what it had been. That was enough. That was more than enough. Nora was waiting in the apartment when Caroline got back. She had made tea. She had also, apparently, reorganized the kitchen counter. The spices were in a different order. The mugs had migrated to a different shelf, which was what Nora did when she had been sitting with nervous energy for 90 minutes and needed her hands to do something. Caroline looked at the counter. You reorganized my kitchen. I do what I need to do, Nora said. How did it go? Tell me everything. No, start with his face. Give me his face first. Caroline sat on the couch. She put her feet up because her ankles had developed strong opinions about board meetings and long mornings. She settled in and told Nora about the room, the name card, the ownership summary in the folder. The moment Preston read it and looked up, the conversation afterward. Nora listened without interrupting, which was not always within her capabilities, but which she managed today by sheer force of love and investment in the outcome. When Caroline finished, Nora was quiet for a moment. And then you just walked out, she said. I told him what I needed to tell him. Then I walked out. You didn't deliver a speech? I had something prepared, Nora said with genuine mourning. For you. I was going to text it to you during the meeting. It was very good. I'm sure it was. It had a full closing line and everything. I believe you. Caroline tilted her head back against the cushions. It didn't need a speech. It needed a chair with my name on it and a document that told the truth. Those things did the work. A pause. That's actually perfect, Nora said. I know. Annoyingly, specifically perfect. Also, I know. Nora brought the tea over and sat beside her, and they drank it without speaking for a while, in the long, comfortable silence that is one of the genuine luxuries of a friendship that has lasted long enough not to need filling. Caroline thought about what she had said to Preston. I hope you'll choose to show up. For her, she meant it. She was not naive about it. She knew the architecture of his selfishness built over decades, reinforced by a world that rewarded exactly that kind of careful, comfortable self-interest. She did not expect him to become a different man because a conference room embarrassed him on a Friday morning. But she did not assume the worst either. She was done with assumption in both directions, done with hope that required her to look away, and done with bitterness that required her to stay in the past. Her daughter deserved a father if her father could become one worth having. That was the truth, held cleanly, without performance in either direction. What happened next would depend on him. What happened next for Caroline would not. For a moment, Nora fell asleep on the couch at 4 in the afternoon, which was exactly the kind of thing Nora did after 90 minutes of sustained emotional investment. Caroline covered her with the throw blanket from the armchair and went to stand at the window, looking at the street. The October afternoon, the ordinary world doing its ordinary, extraordinary thing. She checked her phone. One text from Preston, thank you for what you said today. I'll be in touch about next steps. She read it. She put the phone face down on the windowsill. She did not respond yet. She would, but not yet. Right now, she just stood at the window and breathed. Her mother called at 4:30. Tell me, Dorothy said. Caroline told her. She told her about the chair and the name card and the document and Preston's face when he understood. She told her about the conversation afterward. She told her about walking out of the room and Marcus in the corridor saying boss in the same tone he had used for 4 years, as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world, which it was, which it had been, which today felt like something rung clearly in the air. She told her mother about sitting in the reading lounge, about the garden, about breathing. Dorothy listened to all of it. When Caroline finished, there was a silence. Then Dorothy said, I want to tell you something I never told you. Let me. Caroline was quiet. When I was working at the Pemberton, Dorothy said I used to imagine sometimes, standing in one of those rooms after I'd finished it, standing in the center of it, the bed perfect, the light right, everything in its place. A pause. I never imagined owning it. I couldn't get my imagination that far. Another pause. But you could. You imagined it, and you went and built it, and I didn't even know. Her voice carried something that was not quite crying and not quite not. I should have been there helping you. I'm sorry I didn't know. Mom. Caroline's throat tightened. You were there. You were always there. Everything I know about how these places should feel that came from you. From your stories. From watching you come home and the way you talked about those rooms and the people in them. I learned to read a hotel from you. A long pause. You built this on what I taught you, Dorothy said slowly. On exactly that, Caroline said. On exactly that. Sunday morning, Preston and Sloan checked out on Saturday. Marcus reported it to her professionally. the way he reported any guest departure. She thanked him and went back to her contractor meeting. Final mirror moment, 2 weeks later. She is in the reading lounge with the window overlooking the garden, and she realizes she has not checked her phone once all morning. It has been sitting face down in her bag since she arrived. Not because she is avoiding anything on it, because there is nothing on it she is dreading. This is new. She notices it the way you notice the absence of a sound you have gotten so used to that you stopped hearing it with quiet, uncomplicated relief. She does not pick up the phone. She refills the carafe. She sits back down. She looks at the garden. November came to the Hargrove Grand. The East Wing renovation finished on schedule. She walked it on the first Saturday of the month, alone, in the early morning before anyone else arrived. New floors. Rebuilt lighting, the warm gold she had argued for, which was perfect, which she had known would be perfect. 8 new rooms that were exactly what she had designed them to be. She stood in the center of room 807, the corner room with the garden view, and she turned in a slow circle. This is mine, she thought. Not with triumph. With something quieter than triumph. Something closer to propriety in its deepest sense, not possession but responsibility. Care. This building was hers to protect and tend and improve, and eventually someday to hand on. She thought of her mother at 28 changing sheets. She thought of herself at 24, learning to read a hotel the way her mother had taught her. She thought of her daughter, who would know who she would make absolutely certain knew that the world could be built as well as inherited. Dorothy came to the hotel for the first time on a Sunday in mid-November. Caroline had thought about how to show her mother what she had built. She had planned it, considered it, nearly overcomplicated it. Then she decided on the simplest possible thing. She walked her through it, room by room, the way her mother had once walked through the Pemberton on her morning rounds. No presentation, just the place. Dorothy said very little. She touched things, the door frames, the window ledges. She ran her hand along the freshly dressed bed in one of the new East Wing rooms. She looked at the light, really looked at it, the way someone looks at something they understand. She went to the reading lounge. She sat in the chair by the window. She looked at the garden for a long time without speaking. Your grandmother, she said finally, used to say that a person's life should have at least one room that is entirely their own. She looked up at Caroline. I think you found yours. Caroline sat in the other chair. It's a hotel, she said. It's yours, her mother said simply. And that was all. And it was enough. Judith called on a Tuesday in late November with an update on the Preston situation. His attorneys had been in touch. He wanted to establish a formal co-parenting arrangement. He was prepared to be involved. He had, in the weeks since the board meeting, apparently done some work conversations with a therapist, Judith said, carefully, with the tone of someone delivering information that surprised them. It surprised Caroline, too. She received it with genuine, cautious, uncomplicated hope. She called him that evening. It was a short call, practical. They agreed to meet with their attorneys the following week. She kept it professional. She kept it kind. She did not perform forgiveness she wasn't ready to feel, and she did not perform coldness she didn't feel either. Thank you for calling, he said at the end. Of course, she said. A pause. I was wrong, he said, about a lot of things. She waited. I'm not asking you to stop. I'm just saying it. Okay, she said. I hear you. She meant it. She did not know what his version of better looked like. She did not know if he was capable of it, or how far it went, or whether it would hold. She was willing to find out slowly, with eyes open and attorneys present, for the sake of a little girl who deserved every available good thing in her path. That was enough to start. January 4th. Her daughter arrived at 6:17 in the morning under the honest fluorescent lights of the delivery room, with the dramatic and total commitment that Caroline already suspected would characterize her entire life. She was loud. She was entirely present. She was a full declaration of existence in 5 pounds, 14 ounces. Caroline held her and looked at her face, that specific, impossible face of a person who has just arrived and is looking at everything for the first time, and what she felt was not complicated. It occupied every register of her body like a chord struck all the way through and held. Dorothy was in the chair in the corner, crying freely, with no apology and no attempt to manage it. Nora was in the waiting room, eating vending machine crackers and composing approximately 30 text messages that she would send in a single burst the moment someone gave her the signal. Gene called at 7 and cried a little himself, which he would later deny to anyone who asked. She named her daughter Clara, Clara Dorothy Whitfield, named for no one Preston suggested, named for 2 women who built themselves from the ground up and held the door open behind them. Final validation whisper. Lying in the hospital bed on Clara's first night in the world, wide awake while her daughter slept in the bassinet beside her, Caroline thought clearly, finally, with all the calm she had spent a year earning, the worst thing that happened to me turned out to be the door. Not the wall, the door. I just didn't know it yet. I know it now. 3 months later, Saturday morning, the hotel lobby at 9. Caroline was crossing from the elevator to the main corridor, Clara in the carrier on her chest, 3 months old and deeply seriously interested in the lobby chandelier above them, when Marcus fell into step beside her with the morning report. He walked her through it. Occupancy numbers. Overnight incidents, none. A small situation with a guest that had been resolved before anyone had to escalate it. She listened. She asked 2 questions. She approved one decision and redirected another. They reached the east wing, and she slowed to look at the corridor. The new floors, the warm gold light, exactly as she had specified it. It was right, it was exactly right. Good week, Marcus said. Good week, she agreed. Clara batted at the carrier strap with both hands deliberately, interested in the texture of it. Or maybe the morning light, or maybe everything, all at once, which was how it felt to be 3 months old and newly arrived in a world full of things to notice. Marcus looked at her with the expression he always got when he was trying not to be visibly charmed by something. She's got your eyes, he said. She's got her own eyes, Caroline said. We just haven't figured out yet what they see. She went to her morning walkthrough. Her daughter watched the light. The hotel hummed around them, systems running, kitchen producing, rooms being turned, guests arriving and departing and arriving again, the whole steady breathing of a place that was doing exactly what it was built to do. All of it hers to tend, all of it hers to love. She had her room. She had her building. She had her name on the door. And she had this particular, irreducible, quiet satisfaction of having become, on her own terms and in her own time, exactly who she intended to be. Not despite what happened, not in spite of him. Because of herself. That was the difference. That was the whole story.